Imperial yeast is at it again with their Imperialis project, creating yet another unique proprietary strain through the hybridization of two other yeasts. In addition to its excellent attenuation and rapid reduction of diacetyl, I-10 Mangostini contributes robust, ripe tropical fruit, strawberry, and lychee notes to beer that complement modern hops. And as a Kveik hybrid, it can be fermented anywhere from 78 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 26 to 32 degrees Celsius without issue. Head over to imperialyeast.com to learn more about I-10 Mangostini and be sure to pick some up for your next batch of fruity IPA. All the way back in December of 2014, less than a year after Brewlosophy got started, we sent out the very first iteration of our annual General Homebrewer Survey. At the time, homebrewing was on an absolute tear. It seemed like everyone knew someone who brewed at home. Online forums were super active. Homebrew shops were popping up all over the place to meet the demand. It was truly an amazing time to be a homebrewer. Well, we've continued to collect our annual data in hopes of better understanding what the modern homebrewer looks like. And while the industry has experienced some pretty major changes over the last decade, there are certain things that have remained rather constant. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me on this Brews Views episode to discuss the current state of homebrewing is contributor Will Lovell.
Man, I look forward to these surveys every year. It's just really cool to go through and especially have like a little bit of historical data just to look back and get kind of these snapshots of what brewing's been going through over the last few years. So I'm super excited to talk about it.
Yeah, since starting the podcast in 2017, we started this a couple years after starting the website. Many listeners have asked us why we haven't done an episode going over our annual survey findings. And as I thought about that recently, I realized my hesitation was because I really don't want to spin these results as suggesting anything more than what they are. We are very well aware that the information gleaned from this survey is just a slice of the total pool of all homebrewers, particularly those who fancy Brewlosophy. However, there are certain things I'm pretty convinced can be generalized from this data. And either way, our point in this Brews Views episode is just to blow hard a little bit about our views of the findings from the survey. So that's what we're going to be doing. As always, I do want to caution listeners that we tend to be a little less filtered on this series and may use some language you don't like. So keep that in mind. And considering the topic at hand, we may also share some opinions of ours that you may not agree with. And while we are perfectly okay with that on our end, we just want to be very clear that it's not our point to offend you or to hurt anybody's feelings, anything like that. So these are just our opinions. That's the purpose of this series. All right. If you like what we're up to and you want us to keep doing it, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy by committing to a small monthly pledge over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. You'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world coming up in July of 2023. One of the most well-known voices in brewing, author of Brewing Classic Styles and host of the Killer Brew Strong podcast on the Brewing Network, the one and only Jamil Sainashef. In addition to everything he's done for homebrewing, Jamil founded Heretic Brewing back in 2010 and spent the better part of the last decade running that. And while he's no longer affiliated with the company, he's got a ton of experience brewing on both the homebrew and commercial scales. If you want to be a part of this awesome session, you're going to have to make your pledge at patreon.com/Brewlosophy no later than Friday, July 28th, 2023, as Jamil's going to be taking questions that Saturday, the 29th. All past sessions are stored on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so patrons can go back and watch them whenever they like. And just a quick aside, if it were not for our patrons, if it were not for the people who are doing this monthly pledge for us, we honestly wouldn't be able to keep doing it. So major cheers to everybody who has taken that step to support us through Patreon. We really do appreciate it. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience won't change at all. We get a little kickback for the referral. And if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you prefer to listen to podcasts, we'd appreciate that as well. High five to everyone who's taken the few seconds to do that already. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who in addition to having a badass YouTube channel chock full of great brewing related content, sell what we believe to be are some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120 volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240 volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Adrian Boley hit us up with some thoughts after listening to episode 283, where we talked about the impact mash temperature has on non-alcoholic lager. Adrian said, I noticed you didn't mention the party guile method for NA brewing. You take the spent grain from a regular alcoholic brew, preferably around 5% ABV, and then do a second mash and brew. It's a method I've been playing around with when I brew American Pale Ale. I have 2 Brewzillas and mash in one at 152F, that's 67C, for 60 minutes with a 10-minute mash out at 168F. Or 76C. Then I immediately transfer the grains to the second Brewzilla for a 60-minute mash at 168F or 76C. This has yielded OGs around 1007 with FG around 1001. Although none of them have been technically NA beers or non-alcoholic beers, they have all been in the 0.7 to 1% ABV range. Out of my 3 attempts, I've only been able to produce bitter bombs or a slightly grainy hop water. I like the idea of reusing grains, and I plan on trying again when I brew a hazy IPA in a few weeks. I think the oats in the hazy recipe will help give the NA beer more body and mouthfeel, and I feel the higher OG and FG will also help.
Yeah, that's a really fascinating. I'm not super familiar with brewing NA beers because it's not something that I personally have had any interest in. I'm super stoked for Cade and guys like that are actually trying to explore that area for Brewlosophy. But I do think it is an interesting concept. I don't know why it wouldn't work. I do share the concerns. I would think you would either get a bitter bomb or kind of like a slightly grainy hop water. But that's not too different than a lot of NA beers that I've had. So, but carry on. Let us know how it works out for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right there with you, Will. First off, I like your kind of creative way of thinking, Adrian, but I think the one thing I appreciate more is your honesty. If you would have asked me how I think this method, the party guile method for making low or no alcohol beers would work, I would probably have guessed that the beers would turn out being bitter bombs or, a grainy hop water or whatever, however you described it. I really think the key in these low and no alcohol beers is having enough malt in the recipe to make the finished product actually resemble beer, even though it doesn't taste exactly like it because you're kind of missing a lot of the more fermented malt sugars and such. I don't make NA beer. I still have yet to have an NA beer that I would want to drink over sparkling water. That's just my own preference. But from the people that I've talked to, Cade and such, who are exploring this low and no alcohol brewing, I think the key really is having enough malt in there. And if you're taking all of the sugars from your first runnings and then trying to party guile and just getting 1007, there's a reason it's at 1007 because there's just not that much left in those grains. So again, I think it's rad. Keep exploring it. And if you come up with something, make sure to hit us up. And I will be interested to hear how the hazy IPA NA beer turned out, but I have my assumptions as to how that's going to work. So thank you so much for the feedback, Adrian. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a line on social media. If you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Brewlosophy Show, so that you're notified when new episodes drop. Martin has put a ton of work into this project. We are very proud of it, and we think you're going to love it as well. To find the channel, you can search YouTube for Brewlosophy or go to youtube.com/@TheBrewlosophy Show. When we come back from this break, we'll be sharing our unabashed thoughts on the current state of homebrewing. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling wort can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to Exchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. As anyone who has taken our annual General Homebrewer Survey knows, we ask a lot of questions on it, some that are more specifically brewing based, while others are demographical, intended to paint a portrait of what the modern homebrewer looks like. Seeing as there's far too much to address on this one-ish hour episode, we've selected some of what we believe to be the more interesting findings, and to keep things at least somewhat organized, we're going to focus on the specifically brewing related stuff in this first segment. So Will, before we get into the data, I want to spend a minute talking about the obvious, which is that homebrewing, and really brewing in general, it seems, appears to be on a bit of a decline right now. I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, why people seem to have less interest in brewing and beer in general. What do you think?
So there's kind of two observations. One is more statistical in nature that I have, and the other one's more observational. And so we'll start with the observational. I was at my local HEB, the local grocery store here in town, the other day, and really, like, the amount of like good craft beer on the shelf. There's quite a bit of quality beer on the shelf right now. And so to me, like, if you can get it at the store, maybe you have much less of a reason to brew it. Because back in my day when I was doing this stuff, I remember, brewing beer because I couldn't get the Belgian or the kind of style that I wanted. And so if I can get it from my local HEB, do I really need to go out of my way to get a bunch of equipment and brew it myself?
Yeah, that is that's a reason that I've heard quite a bit, that the reason a lot of people were home brewing was because they didn't have access to the types of beers that they wanted to drink, or even the commercial beers that they wanted access to. So when Russian River didn't distribute anywhere, and the only place you could drink Pliny the Elder was a special beer bar in San Francisco, or you had to go to Santa Rosa, people would find a clone recipe, brew it for themselves, or invent their own double IPA, and then that was kind of the joy of homebrewing. That was never what drove me. For me, it was the what I would imagine is the same thing that motivates most people in any hobby. It was the productive aspect, that feeling that I created this thing. I had something to dig my fingers into. So I get that as an argument, but it's so difficult for me seeing just how quickly things are in decline right now. And there are some interesting, I think, points of evidence that show this. I mean, you just look, we've got more craft breweries now than we did 10 years ago. There's no denying that. But I've also noticed a lot of them are closing up their doors because they can't sustain. There's that. Recently, the AHA announced that they're going to be combining the HomebrewCon with GABF. And while I do not have a direct quote from anybody at the BA about why they're doing that, it seems pretty clear to me that a part of that is because of the lack of people who are attending both of these events, and that it would just be difficult to keep them separate with so few people attending. Now, I don't know if that's the case. That's kind of some of the murmuring that I've heard, in homebrewing circles and such. But it's fascinating to me that it's going down, because I would think, that this DIY thing that so many people were into, they just don't seem to be as into it. And one of the points of evidence on our end is pretty objective, in fact, is that for this survey, we usually get between about 22 and 2,600 people to respond to this on this survey. This year, we got 1,191. And when I pointed that out, people were like, well, it's probably because you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, or why didn't I hear about it? We did everything the exact same. Well, not the exact same. There were a few little concessions that we did make. Perhaps we'll get to that later. But still, almost 1,000 fewer respondents. What that says to me is that 1,000 fewer people just didn't see this, or weren't interested, or no longer brewing. And that's just, I don't know what else that could be. It's not because we didn't, spam it on Reddit. It's not because, come on, this stuff has been out there. People know where to find it. It just blows my mind how different things are this year than they've ever been.
So one thing, like I said, I had anecdotal, but statistically speaking, I was reading around, and it does appear that Gen Z just doesn't drink as much as, say, the Gen X and Boomer generations do. And I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. In fact, for probably mental and physical health, it's a really great thing.
Sure.
But honestly, like if they're not drinking as much, and also millennials, they drink more than Gen Z, but still not as much as the Gen X and Boomer generations do. And so maybe just drinking as a whole with younger people, maybe all the health messages got through, and it's just, drinking as a whole is on decline. Because if you're not drinking beer, then why would you brew it?
Well, and that kind of leads into another kind of explanation as to where, why things are going or trending the way that they are, is that the advent of all of these other non-beer alcoholic beverages as well. So in addition to people just not drinking as much alcohol, which, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's not a bad thing, really, but so to add to that, you've got a whole segment of people who just aren't interested in beer. They want cocktails, they want seltzer water, or alcoholic seltzer, cider, mead, wine, stuff like that. So of course, if that's taking more of the market share, as it were, then homebrewing is going to see that, or brewing in general is going to see that. When I go to any local brewery around my place, you better believe they have more than just beer on tap. And nowadays, they've got the variety of seltzers. Crow and Wolf, no joke, has a slushy machine behind their bar now, and they keep one of their popular, really sweet seltzer waters in it, and you can go and get basically an icy with booze in it. I mean, like that's the way things are trending, I think, and that may be impacting or one of the things that's impacting interest in actually doing this whole thing in your garage. And like you mentioned, in terms of generational stuff, so 61% of the people who responded to this year's survey reported that they've been brewing for 7 years or more. You think about that, right? 7 years. What's that? 2015, 2016 at this point. Only 18% of respondents reported 3 years or less of experience brewing beer. That's crazy to me. I mean, that's less than 20% of the people who took this have been brewing for 3 years or less. In 2019, when we put this survey out, 60% reported 1 to 6 years of experience brewing. Look at that shift. I mean, that's just wild.
That seems like a statistical phenomenon that you would just like hang on to all of those 1 to 6 years of experienced people for that long and like still have 61-ish%. That's within a margin of error, right? So maybe just folks, they stuck around, like they survived COVID. They've still been doing this hobby, and it's just, becomes a part of their lifestyle. But that is a wild statistic to me. And then as far as the liquor store thing, like I love going to the liquor store and being able to buy gin and tonics in a can. That's pretty awesome. But
I've yet to have one in a can that I like more than what I make at home, just because it's so easy to make at home. But yeah, I can't complain either. I like White Claw. I like all of this new stuff that's coming. Well, most of the new stuff that's coming out. But yeah, it's so weird because it's like this segment. It almost makes it look like there's this segment of people who have just kind of stuck with brewlosophy, being that we're the ones who put this survey out, and it's just kind of drifting along with us, year after year, temporally speaking. And I don't think that's actually what's happening, but it's very telling that in a survey of nearly 1,200 homebrewers, that only 18% of them have been in this for 3 years or less. I mean, back when we first did the survey, I believe it was 2017, may have been 15, in fact. I think it was something. It was far more dispersed. We'll put it that way. I think something like 35% had been in for 3 years or less, with a fairly equal distribution, for all other ages or other years of experience. It's just wild to me. Something that you have some experience with, Will, as one of the leadership members of the Brew Club. In fact, you were involved with that before you were an official member of Brewlosophy, is Homebrew Club membership and involvement in that. Now, this one's interesting to me because I feel like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, really the only outlet people had to communicate with other homebrewers were local clubs. Yeah, there were meetups and such, but those usually turned into some form of a club. We've got some interesting stats on the how homebrew clubs are doing, at least in 2023 at this point.
Right. So I'm seeing that 56% aren't in any club, 29% are affiliated with a local club, 8% are affiliated with an online club, and then the last 8% is affiliated with both local and online, which is kind of where I sit. And I just want to tell you, there's no reason not to be in a club because, again, with the online stuff, you can join the Brew Club anytime. It's free. We have a really active Discord channel. There's not a day that people aren't discussing things on that Discord channel. But that said, after the shameless plug, with all that information shifting, I think it's part of it's where do we get our information now? Like as you kind of alluded to, we've gone from mostly like, you get your Papazian book or your John Palmer How to Brew book, and you read it, and then you get all the rest of your information from a local homebrew shop or from the local brew club. There was still homebrew chat's been around for a long time. Homebrew Talk, it's been around for a long time, but now we're shifting to most of your information. I can go on YouTube right now and go watch the Apartment Brewer, whoever, and get like grain to glass videos over and over and over again. And if you find the right video, you can get it on the system that you bought. Like somebody's showing you how to brew on your electric all-in-one that you just bought. And so again, the need for some of these outlets is more social now than it is informative, although there's a lot of information you can glean from these people, and it's really great. Like again, with this online thing with Discord for the brew club, like I have a question, I just ping these people, and all of a sudden I got like, a lot of eyes on it to give me experiences, opinions, and everything else.
Yeah, it's 56% aren't in any club at all. Now, this is a question that we added for the 2023 survey. It'll be on there in future iterations as well. So we can't compare it to, past survey results, but 56% just aren't affiliated with any club. I would never have guessed it would be that high. I do think COVID probably played a role in this because those 3 years I was talking to somebody who's a president who I think there was a president of a club in their local region, and was telling me that the club was doing well. COVID hit. They decided to do the online thing where they were doing monthly like virtual beer shares. They'd go and like 2 or 3 guys would organize drop off points, and then they'd go distribute them out to the other 10 dudes who were involved in this. And that lasted for like 6 months. And then it started to like, oh, let's just do it every 3 months. And then that just never happened. And now the club is no longer. So, when you don't have that face to face, when you don't have that experience, I think it can really impact the way people view or their interest in being a part of a club like that.
Yeah, I'm really lucky. So the local club that I hang out with is the San Antonio Cerveceros, and there's a lot of really great people, a lot of really great brewers there. And I think we're pretty lucky. We have a pretty solid turnout like every month. We have pretty solid beer share there. And we have both brewers and people that are just beer enthusiasts alike. And so I feel pretty lucky that the Cerveceros is here in town and still going strong. But I could totally see COVID, especially in places with really strict lockdown measures, how that could totally just kill, a brew club. I mean, it obviously killed several breweries and brew shops. Yeah,
exactly. And that's a huge bummer. And I think that really does, when you're looking at the kind of gross state of homebrewing in 2023, that the club membership thing is to me is kind of an analog of how things are going in general. We're going to move past talking about kind of the decline stuff and just look at the things that brewers are doing and the way that they're approaching it. Back when I started homebrewing, again, this is 20 years ago, so things were just wildly different back then. No, but if you made a hazy IPA, it just means that you packaged your IPA too early. There was no spinning off of that. But the unfiltered was very popular to talk about. But, when I got into it, people were still really excited about Belgian ale. They were making, I loved brewing British ale back then. IPA was the thing. People liked to brew IPA and all of that. But there was kind of this, at least my experience was that it was really well-rounded. People had this, multiple interest in brewing beers that they can't have access to. We're not in England. We're not in Belgium. So let's see if we can make a better example than what we're getting, dusty off the shelves at the liquor store type of thing. In 2023, 47% of respondents said that the beers that they're brewing most, or the styles that they're brewing most frequently, are IPA and American Pale Ale. So hoppier pale ales. That's down from 56% in 2019. So a whopping 11% difference. I think that's pretty interesting. IPA, pale ale, hoppy beers, still obviously probably the most popular styles that homebrewers want to make. But get this one, 15% of respondents said that the beers that they're brewing most frequently are pale lager, which is up from just 6% 4 years ago. People are so interested in lager brewing nowadays, and I think that is a fantastic thing.
Oh, I actually love that. You kind of have seen that industry wide though, where loggers, like Abbey Jack up in the New England area, some of these lager only brewing outfits and breweries out there that are just like really bringing craft lager to the forefront. And you're seeing kind of a rise in, lagers even at some of the local breweries here, which is absolutely amazing. And I think it's somewhat in a response to kind of not to trash talk hazy IPA or anything, but it's somewhat of a response to that because hazy IPA is somewhat of a controversial style in a lot of people's minds. Like if you're old school and like the clear West Coast style, you may not be into the hazy IPA. I know that I enjoy a good representation of the style, but I'm not the biggest hazy guy. So I love seeing all these pale lagers come into the forefront. And I used to brew a lot of Belgians and English ales. I find myself brewing a lot more lagers because, again, it's just crisp, refreshing, delicious, and kind of somewhat opposite of what you can get out and about.
Yeah. Well, what do you think, just spitballing, these are your opinions. Why do you think people are brewing more pale lagers today than they were just 4 or 5 years ago?
Again, like hazy is kind of this thing. And so it's, to me, like a refreshing pale lager is almost like the opposite of a hazy IPA in some ways, because you have this crisp, clean, refreshing drink versus, a lot of hazies, they to me, like they don't pair well with food because they kind of have this like aftertaste that kind of lingers because of the water profile and some of that stuff. And so if you just want something crisp, easy, refreshing, like pale lager is just like almost the antithetical to that. And so it may be just kind of and you see more of these IPLs that are out there. Like I know locally, I've seen a lot more IPLs come out. Roadmap has their Minor and Italian, which is like their Italian Pilsner that's like a dry hopped Italian Pils, and it's super crispy, delicious with a nice hop character. Second Pitch here locally has their Party at the Neighbors, which is an India Pale Lager that, I can get at the grocery store shelves. It's fantastic. It's hard not to pick up a 6-pack every time I go by. And it's just, again, these fresh, refreshing, like, they cleanse your palate really well, and they pair a lot better with food, in my opinion, than say the hazy that just kind of lingers in there for a long time.
Yeah. So for you, it sounds like you think that the interest in brewing lager, among homebrewers at least, is kind of a reaction to the other popular stuff that's out there right now. It's kind of a reversion back to the simpler styles of beer. I get that, and I think that plays into it. I think the bigger thing is that people are less afraid to brew lagers nowadays. And, there's been a lot of experimentation, a lot of people reporting positive results from doing things that aren't the traditional way that make making these styles of beers more approachable and more doable. I mean, when I first started brewing, it was like, even the homebrew shop was like, oh, but you're never going to make a lager. Like that takes way too much work. You need a lot of equipment to do that. And that was basically, I took that, I embraced that idea for over a decade before actually trying my hand at brewing these beers the traditional way. And then I started obviously kind of exploring different ways to ferment them, the impact actual lagering time has and stuff like that. And now I can turn, what I think is, and most of my friends think, is a delicious German Pilsner or something. I turn one of those around in the same time I can a blonde ale, using these different techniques that may be blasphemous to the dogmatists, but it works. And I think I wonder if that's not just, playing a role in why more people are interested or are actually brewing more pale lager. Another stat from this one in terms of the beer styles that I thought was interesting is the number of people who said that their primary styles brewed are wild and sour beer. 2019, you got to remember, this was pre-COVID, just a few years after Tonsmeier released American Wild, American Sour Beer. The whole sour thing was just on the up and up. COVID hits, and it seems like that whole I would have thought people would have taken more time to like, okay, I got all this time on my hands now. I'm gonna invest some time in making these long, traditional style sour beers. 2% of respondents said that that's what their main focus is on, down from 5% in 2019, and I think it was around 5-6% in 2015 on that survey as well. That's fascinating to me. It's like that whole segment of brewing seems to be losing interest a little bit, and I wonder if it's not for some of the same reasons people were avoiding making lagers earlier, that it seems like it requires more work, that it takes a bigger investment of time and energy.
Well, there are quite a bit of like sour dogmatists out there that don't like think that kettle souring or whatever we want to call that quick souring method is like a real sour beer. And it seems it does have a lot of parallels with that whole, you got to make a traditional cold fermented lager kind of thing. And so to me, like it kind of makes sense, because if you're going to have that kind of dogmatist, like, you're told you need separate fermentation vessels so you don't get like cross contamination, you need your own like bottling or beer keg lines to get all this equipment to the side. It almost sounds like you need absolutely double of everything just so you can brew these like wild sour beers without messing up your normal brewery. And so that may be a point of contention that like kind of like narrows it down to a smaller field of people.
Yeah, I don't go to the beer store very often, but when in the times that I do, I have noticed some things changing. It used to be that I could walk into a Bevmo or a Total Wine, and there would be a pretty solid, commercial sour beer selection. And that seems to be dwindling quite a bit. I'm not finding that as much, and I wonder if that kind of is a sign that interest in sour beers is reducing, or if they're, I guess. The whole supply demand thing. There's this demand for hazy beers, for all of these hoppy beers, and even for pale lagers and amber and dark lagers and stuff right now. That's taking up more shelf space, and maybe that is also kind of directing homebrewer interests in what they're making as well. I don't know, but I do think it's interesting. All right, let's spend some time talking about different approaches to actually brewing beer. I think this is a fun one. Again, it gives it kind of a fun idea or view of what modern homebrewers are doing these days. And we're going to do a little bit of comparing to past surveys as well. 97% of respondents reported that they currently brew using all grain methods. 97%, which has not changed much over the years. But what is interesting to me is about 2/3 of these people started with some form of extract before converting to all grain. Now, we don't have the ability to do these like, factorial analysis and stuff like that. But when you consider the experience level, right, that people reported being on this survey, that's primarily that 7 to 10 year range of brewing, and that most of them, 2/3 of them, about 66%, started with extract and are now brewing, 97% are now brewing all grain. That is a very quick transition, at least, compared to what we were doing back when I started brewing. I brewed extract for almost a decade before jumping into all grain because of how scary all grain sounded, and all the way that it was talked about was like, oh my God, that's going to be so difficult. But there were some new methods that were coming out, 15 years ago. The whole batch sparge thing just blew the whole homebrewing world up because everybody could do all grain just as easily, as an extract batch. 97% of people are brewing all grain. I think that's fantastic.
And again, it just shows, again, we have more experienced brewers on the whole, because again, there's not a very large percentage of like less than 3 years running. And I do think still 7-8 years ago, the main way of getting people into the hobby was definitely go extract with steeping grains, get your process down, and then shift over to all grain. But I think with current methods that we're going to talk about here in just a second, the shift to all grain's been made even easier, even simpler than batch sparging, honestly.
Yeah, no joke. I completely agree. So what all grain method do you use currently right now, Will?
So I am one of the 43% that uses an electric all-in-one system.
As am I. I think that is you're going to start to see more and more of that. And this is one of those stats that we've been fascinated to follow along with. Little side story. When we did the first survey back in 2015, and we're coming up with the survey questions, and one of them was, what all grain method do you use? And it was like, fly and continuous sparge, batch sparge, no sparge, brew in a bag. That was it. And we released a survey, and we got so much feedback of people being like, well, what if you brew on your stovetop inside, and it's electric, or you have an electric kettle that you use, and yada yada. And we were like, what? Nobody does that. Like, very few people are doing that. But yeah, it was an oversight on our part. We'll include it in the next survey. Just in 2018, so 5 years ago, just 13% of respondents, now this was, I think, 2,400 respondents, reported brewing on an electric system. It has gone up to 43%. That is wild to me. The people who are producing these, fairly inexpensive, easily accessible electric brewing systems, these all-in-one systems, whether that's Clawhammer or Grainfather or Brewzilla, whatever it is, my goodness, they're doing a good job of getting these in the hands of homebrewers right now. And I think that's cool.
Well, and why not? Like, I mean, my buddy who's a neighbor around the corner, he wanted to get into brewing. And while I showed him how to do it on my electric all-in-one, we took the exact same methodology, went around the corner, bought a $15 bag off Amazon, yeah. And all of a sudden he had a brew in a bag on a large pot on his stovetop, and he's off to the races. So like, really, brew in a bag, electric all-in-one, I mean, if you combine those two together, that's like over 50% of what people are doing.
Yep.
Which is, to me, like, it makes total sense, because why would you go back to like having this cooler that's actually kind of a pain in the butt to clean out? It's kind of a pain to do all these things. So you can do everything in a single pot, in a single all-in-one system, and have way less cleanup, a way simpler time. And it's just, it's super easy. Like getting into brewing has never been easier or cheaper because of what's going on right now.
Yeah, I remember back, I'd been batch sparging for maybe 5 years or so, and somebody was like, well, why don't you just do brew in a bag? You can do full vault. You're already doing no sparge in your mash tun, so you can do no sparge, in your kettle instead. It's just as easy. You just remove the grains from the wort as opposed to the other way around. And I'm like, you know what? I'll give it a shot. And I brewed one batch doing that, and it was so easy. Didn't have to clean a big cooler. Didn't even have to get my big cooler out. And then, I remember telling myself like, well, I'll do batch sparge when I'm like brewing for competition, because that's going to produce the better beer. Once we did some comparisons, and we've got, batch sparge versus brew in a bag experiments out there. I have not brewed batch sparge since then, and likely never will again unless I'm helping somebody out. Everything else, every other approach has been on the decline. Speaking of batch sparge, 5 years ago, 30% of respondents reported that they use the batch sparge method. This year, just 15% reported that. So you can kind of see right there that a lot of that 15% that left batch sparge likely moved into these electric all-in-one brewing systems. I think that's fascinating. In terms of lager fermentation, 44% prefer fermenting lagers at traditional, cool temps. Very fascinating, and I love that. So we're seeing this rise in interest in homebrewers making lager beers. It's not quite half, but you got 44%, a plurality, who are still preferring those cool lager temperatures or fermentation temperatures when making their lagers. Another 20% reported preferring fermenting warm. I'm among that group, compared to just 15% in 2018, so a 5% bump there. And then 24% said that they use the quick lager method versus 41% just 5 years ago. That's fascinating to me. I remember, one of the big things that I wrote about was how I ferment lagers. I pitch cool, let it ferment a couple days, and I start ramping the temperature up. Right around the same time, Tasty McDole, R.I.P. there, was talking about the same thing. He and I actually used to chat about this and how neither of us really owned this method, but people would apply like the Tasty method or the Brewlosophy quick lager method or whatever. It was just an idea that I had, and he got it from Narcissus, I believe. But yeah, a lot of people aren't using that anymore. I think they're realizing that you can just skip the whole cold pitch thing and either ferment it warm all the way together or just keep it cool.
And just to recap, quick lager, just kind of a 1,000-foot view to, explanation from the guy that isn't trying to claim he invented this method, is, you're basically, when you pitch your yeast under your wort, you're pitching an appropriate starter. It's roughly 50F or 10C. Again, this is 1,000-foot view. After your beer reaches about 50% attenuation, which can take, roughly a week, maybe 4 days, maybe 8 days, depends on the gravity of the beer. Then you start ramping it up over a few days to get up to like 65F or 18C, and then let it ferment out and finish up for another week or two.
Yeah. And we still have the approach that I did. It's still written up. It's still on the website. People still view it. It's one of our most popular static pages that we've got on the website, but it seems like people aren't using it as much.
I haven't heard much about it, but I haven't heard much about like quick lagering very much anymore. But I do think, for some reason psychologically, we talked about lagers and how more accessible they were. Like 20% prefer fermenting warm. I wonder if the popularity of spunding and like the psychological thing that people believe that does, or maybe it does literally do something, but like how that reduces esters. Not that we've been able to prove it, but I wonder if spunding has made it seem more approachable to do warm fermentation, and that's why that's gone up a little bit. But I haven't done a quick lager or a traditional lager in years at this point, so I'm with the warm fermentation camp. Yeah,
the whole idea that fermenting under pressure, I have my opinions on that. I think people needed an excuse for fermenting warm, and so they're like, oh, if we do it under pressure, then we can, it validates this warm fermentation. But of course you can't. We haven't been able to prove that fermenting under pressure has any impact perceptibly whatsoever. So that is for another episode, though. All right, on to something that was I guess another thing that was pretty meaningful to Brewlosophy in the beginning. Right after we started the website, I shared this method that I use for cleanly harvesting yeast, and I would overbuild starters, and then by overbuild, I would, rather than building it up to what the calculator says I should, I'd build it up to about 100 billion cells, more than that, and then I would harvest that extra yeast so I could reuse it later on, really nice and clean. People were using it like crazy. 59% of people in 2023, 59% forego harvesting yeast altogether, meaning that they're using fresh yeast with each batch. This is up from 46%. It's 13% difference in 2018, and I believe it was even higher or lower that number was a little bit lower in 2015. People just don't seem to be harvesting yeast as much. They're kind of cool going and spending a little extra money, ostensibly, on fresh yeast for each batch.
So that's not really surprising to me. If you go look at the survey and you look at, I think it's 45% of people prefer using dried yeast, or that's their dominant yeast that they use. And so to me, dry yeast is so much cheaper. Honestly, the catalog in the last 5 years of dry yeast that's out there through Lallemand and whoever else, I mean, even White Labs has a dry yeast strain now, which is kind of crazy to think about. So there's a lot of dry yeast happening right now, and why not? The shelf life's pretty great. The only kind of downside is it still doesn't have the variety of liquid yeast. So I could totally see, ease of use, getting dry yeast, keeping it in the fridge for however long, and then, why would you repitch it when it's like a half to a third of the cost of liquid? So just, no need to just get a fresh batch every time.
Yeah. No, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I think those two data points together kind of indicate something. And for the people who are harvesting yeast, whereas 27% of respondents said that they use the whole overbuilding starters thing in 2018, just 14% said that they're doing so now. So about half as many respondents. I think that's fascinating. People just aren't using these methods as much anymore. Again, kind of an interesting look at how things shift and how the hobby is evolving, what we're getting interested in, like electric brewing, and what we're moving away from. One thing that brewers I'm really happy to see brewers are maintaining interest in and taking more seriously. Only 15% of respondents reported making no water adjustments at all, and that's down from 30% in 2018. So people are taking their water chemistry far more seriously now. Perhaps with the understanding that by adjusting certain mineral levels, that they're liking the outcome more, that their beers are tasting more the way that they want them to. And I think that's pretty rad.
Well, and when you have apps like Brewfather, which is what most of Brewlosophy uses, you don't have to go to some separate spreadsheet like Brewing Water to kind of figure out your water chemistry anymore. It's just all baked in right in with that calculator, and so it's never been easier to adjust water chemistry.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're just going to run down through some of the more interesting opinions that brewers hold about specific things in the same way that we ask on the survey. It's just kind of line by line, real quick. 92% of respondents on the 2023 survey believe that cold side oxidation is detrimental to beer. That's awesome. 92%. And I'm one of those 92. I did not believe it back in 2015. I am now a hardcore believer that cold side oxidation is bad. 74% believe that all grain brewing produces better beer than extract. 32% feel decoction has a noticeable impact, while 18% disagree with that statement, and 50% are neutral on the topic. So 68% of people, when it comes to decoction, are either neutral to not thinking it has any impact whatsoever. I think that's fascinating. 63% of respondents disagree with the idea that macro or BMC beer is evil, which is similar to findings in 2018. So Miller Lite, we're not going to get lambasted by everybody for admitting our love of that beer. So.
Well, I was on my way to Target to pick up a 6-pack of Bud Light, and I was starting to think a little bit about this question. But honestly, after the whole AB InBev kind of recent event that happened, I wonder if that 63% has changed at all.
Huh. Yeah, that is interesting. I don't know. What I think is,
because we got these results before that whole thing happened, right?
I think it might have been right around the same time, actually, that it happened that we were collecting data on this. I'm not entirely sure though. And one thing that I think is we need to be mindful of, when we look at the decline in brewing and beer overall, homebrewing included in that. The people who are currently drinking Coors Light, Miller Lite, Bud Light are the ones that we want to bring into the fold, or they're the ones who are probably most likely to be interested. Not all of them, but a segment of that. The people who are just getting into beer and they're drinking that stuff now. A segment of those folks are going to be interested in making their own and drinking other styles and whatnot. By making fun of them, basically, I don't think we're doing any favors to ourselves, to homebrewing overall, by trying to lambast those people people and segregate them out. No, I get that people have their political opinions about big beer and corporations and all of that stuff, but we need to be mindful of the impact that our opinions and the way we talk are having, on this hobby that we all love so much. I think that's my opinion. So there is a bit of a snapshot of how modern homebrewers are doing things. While certain numbers are kind of a bummer, like the number of homebrewers who aren't affiliated with a club and such, I think it's pretty cool to see that most brewers these days are taking things that we've shown have a noticeable impact on beer more seriously, like cold side oxidation and water chemistry. When we come back from this break, we're going to be shifting our gears away from how brewers are brewing these days and more toward what these brewers look like. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. All right, a little disclaimer before we get started on this segment. I, as a middle-aged, white, moderately harried dude, accept that I will never be able to fully relate with people who don't share these characteristics of mine. This isn't just something I'm saying to sound, noble or good. I've spent the better part of 2 decades studying the human condition. It's what I do for a living, attempting to understand the experiences of people who are different than me. And what I've come to accept is that as good as it is to put in the effort, there's folly in presuming that I'll ever fully get it, right? I want to always be open to that, but I also don't want to, I think, sound like a doof by saying, I get it. I get where you're coming from. The truth of the matter is that I never will, being in the position that I am. So I have a feeling some listeners are likely rolling their eyes right now, which is totally fine. You all have the power to cut us off whenever you like. You can just press pause. You can skip over this. But we want to talk about this stuff because I think it's fascinating, and I think it gives us an idea of where things are at in homebrewing in general. While the data we share in this segment is ultimately just numbers, our opinions on some of it may, I don't know, it may rub people the wrong way. I don't know. But that is not our point. Again, we're not trying to offend anybody. We're just kind of, off the cuff commenting on some of these findings that I find fascinating. So Will, let's jump right in to how homebrewers look these days by sharing some of their demographics. First off, I think it's important to note that 64% of respondents to this survey came from the United States. I think that's to be expected since we're based out of the United States. But that means that 36% were from other countries around the world. And that's, Australia, New Zealand, the UK, mainland Europe, stuff like that. And we did get a pretty wide swath of respondents from different countries. I think there were even a few from, the Baltics or Russia, stuff like that as well. So there's a decent representation, but 64% are from the United States. Now, of the nearly 1,200 people who responded to this, 98% of them reported being male. 98%. Just 2% reported being something other than male. I think that's fascinating. And then 96% reported being heterosexual. 94% reported being white. Let's talk about that a little bit. So you've got straight white dudes who are homebrewing. What is it about this hobby that you feel attracts just people who look like you and me, Will? I really don't know.
And that's the same thing here. Like, again, I can only see through the lens that I see the world through, and everything else is just a discussion to reach understanding about how other people's lenses are acclimated. So thank you for starting off that way. But honestly, I don't know if it's like cultural. Like, I know like a lot of brewing tradition starts in Germany and the UK, and we associate it, and maybe that's the majority coming from there. But that doesn't seem to really hold too much water, because honestly, let's just look around, and like Japan has a great brewing culture. There's some great beers coming out of Japan. There's some great beers coming out all over the world. So I don't know how well that argument holds up water. I do think it's important though that we kind of talk about why, we're talking about it being kind of a homogenous representation here of just being a bunch of bearded white dudes, middle-aged white dudes, which is you and I. I've heard people say, why do we even care about diversity, people that are somewhat, have some influence in this homebrewing scene? But to me, it's really about like kind of this, I live in San Antonio, and here we have kind of a confluence of cultures, which is really an amazing thing. The things it does for people's perspective, the things it does for food, like the creativity you have by having kind of this, not only just, Mexican influence, but the German and all these other influences that are coming into the city, you get some really great culinary and food scenes. And so for the sake of innovation, for the sake of something new, you need younger people to kind of come in and invigorate that. You need people of a different ethnicity, of a different, different background to come in and, kind of speak into that. You need people of different, of the opposite sex, of a different sex to come in and kind of speak into that. And the more of that we have kind of speaking into this hobby, the more innovation, the more creativity we can have. And I really think that's a kind of an interesting thing. And so, the only other thing I have is like, while it may not be conscious, maybe there is a process of in-grouping and out-grouping, like attracts like kind of thing. That's not necessarily a conscious thing that we focus on, but that does tend to happen in certain groups.
Yeah, man. Well said. I was thinking about the group of brewers that I kind of cut my chops with locally here in Fresno, and similar to San Antonio, we have a very, very strong Hispanic cultural influence here, and I can tell you this that when I was more involved in the local brewing scene as a club member and such, and all my buddies were the board members and all of that. I can tell you very confidently that there's not a single one of them who wouldn't tell you that they think it would be great to have more diversity in brewing. All of us agree with that. We think it would be awesome to have more females brewing beers. We think it would be rad to have more people who aren't white brewing beers and getting involved. That being said, every single one of us, white dudes. And so it's so weird because my brain wants to try to like spin it as being that we have created a barrier objectively, like it was intentional, but I have not seen that piece of it. But there's clearly something about this, about beer, about brewing, that is more appealing to people who look like you and me, Will, than it is to other people. And I don't know. I don't know what to do to change that. So I was sitting around with, this was back, unfortunately, House of Pendragon's tap room closed down over here. They kind of got bought out. Their spot got kind of bought out by the neighboring business. But many years ago, my wife and I were hanging out over there, and there was a bunch of other couples. And so, you had all these guys who homebrew and then their wives. And that's kind of the joke, right? It's like, oh, that the wives support their homebrewing husbands or whatever. And we started talking about like, okay, you like beer. Have you ever made your own beer? And I was asking my buddy's wife. She's like, no interest. Okay, what about you? And she's like, no, I have no interest. That's kind of, Sean's thing, or that's Wes's thing, or whatever. I was like, but you guys both like beer. What's keeping you from going out and getting involved in the same way that your husbands are involved? Well, they're like, I don't know. I don't know why we're not. I just have no interest in doing that. I'd rather just drink what you guys make. I said, okay, I respect that, but what can we do? Like, is there anything that I can do to make this more appealing to you so that you get more involved, so that you want to go to things like HomebrewCon? And one of the responses, and I had to take it seriously because it came, from one of these women that I was asking about their lack of interest in homebrewing, is she said, how would it feel if I came to you and I asked you to come along a girls' trip with us to the beauty store? Would you ever willingly go and do that and to try to get involved in that whole thing? And I thought, there's nothing wrong with guys going to beauty stores or anything like that, but I have no interest in it. And she kind of spun it as in this way of like, you're free to do it, but she's speaking of her and her girlfriends there. We just don't want to. We have no interest. And the way that I took that wasn't that women just don't like to brew. I think that'd be the stupid thing to elucidate out of that. But what I took it as is the harder you push for people who may not be terribly interested in it, to have them be interested at the same level as us, the more unappealing it can actually become. There's like this psychological reversion to being told that you need to be more interested in something. And that got me really thinking like, well, how then, as you know, I've got a history in sales and direct, telling people they have to buy the thing never works. Or it does, but it doesn't work nearly as well as other approaches, right? So I'm thinking, well, what can we do then without directly trying to get people who aren't white middle-aged dudes interested in this hobby without making it feel forceful, like, oh, we need you here. No, we want you here. How do we do that? I really don't know. I can't come up with any ideas. And it seems like all of the attempts that, whether it's the Brewers Association or some other, affiliated thing, the attempts that we're making aren't really making much headway at this point. And maybe that has to do with kind of the decline overall in brewing. But what can be done? I love seeing that we've got more, women or people of color who are doing this thing. And I do everything I can to support it. But my goodness, 98%, 96% heterosexual, 94% white. That is just crazy to me.
Yeah, it really is kind of an odd thing. But, we can't really, like, kind of piggybacking on your story with the wives, like, you can't really force like equity of outcomes. Like, you can't make people be interested in this. It's kind of like in the, more career oriented stuff. Like, most of the nurses, I don't know if it's 80 or 90%, I can't remember the statistic off my head, are female. So there's obviously something about that occupation, that job that attracts more women than men. And so obviously there's probably something about this hobby that attracts more men than women. And even in my local homebrew club, we have several ladies that are craft beer enthusiasts that don't necessarily brew. And I wish I would have had an opportunity to talk to a couple of them just to see what that barrier is there. But they're hanging out with the guys at the local homebrew club. I feel like they're very well received, and I know that they're very well loved and respected there. Amy is awesome. She brings like Pliny the Elder from when she travels and like shares it around the club, which is like, it's like a awesome unicorn here in this part of the world. And so I know everybody like loves and adores those ladies that are in that group, but like, what is the barrier that keeps them from getting into the hobby? I don't know, but they obviously love good beer. So
yeah. Oh, and that's the thing is I don't think that it has anything to do with our sex. I really don't think that's the case. Like you mentioned earlier, I think it has everything to do with culture and the subculture that we've created around certain things, right? Beer is generally, I read this article a few years ago that was fascinating. That was just sentiment towards alcoholic beverages, right? And beer is widely viewed as being like a dude's drink. Like that's a guy's thing. Girls will drink wine, or they'll drink wine coolers, and that's who they market those things to, right? That's who White Claw is marketed to on a large scale, or Mike's Hard Lemonade. But beer is marketed towards guys, and that's been an issue I think in the commercial world for a while. Is people, there have been some great craft breweries who got some heat for their marketing of certain beers towards or I'll call it masculine marketing, if you will. That denigrates, women in some way. And so it's good to see that we're shifting in those ways. Again, I don't know what, from my position, being the person that I am, that I was born as, I don't know what we can do to make it more welcoming. I had a question one time where somebody asked, I've been asked this a few times. Hey, why don't you have any women on the Brewlosophy crew? I'll tell you what. I've tried. I've talked to people. I've thrown out ideas, and every time I do, that first off, the pool is very small. Of people, one of women in general who are homebrewing, and then two, you got to have the in that small group, you got to have those few who are willing to do the crazy stuff that we do all the time, and we just haven't been able to find anyone like that, who's interested on that level. So it's not for lack of trying. I think more than anything, it's for lack of options out there. There's just so few people out there doing it. I love that there are more people who don't look like me who are getting involved in this hobby. I just wish that we had the magic pill to make it more appealing, even more appealing to those folks. And I hope that people feel welcomed. I've never experienced any negativity towards anyone in our homebrew. I think the people who get the most shit in our homebrew club are those who show up just to drink and drunk fest. That has nothing to do with their demographics, though. Those are the ones that we try to avoid, or we kind of talk talk about behind their backs a little bit. But other than that, everyone has been very welcome, and we've had some fantastic, female brewers in our homebrew club as well. And it's good to see that kind of stuff. I think some more interesting demographics, and people always wonder why we ask these questions. Listen, I'm a psychologist. I'm curious like a cat. I like to know these things, and I think it gives us an idea not only of what homebrewers look like, but where we can kind of focus, and maybe, and I don't want to sound too haughty with this, but maybe it can influence some of the decisions that we make to make this hobby better. So 51% of people who responded to this survey, over half, reported that they make $100,000 or more annually, income wise. Wow. I mean, that's just crazy. I can't imagine, and most hobbies are like that.
I can't imagine as either. Some of these demographics make me feel like this is just like the middle-aged white guy midlife crisis. You get into homebrewing or you get into barbecue kind of joke.
Yep.
It definitely feels that way. But yeah, definitely, and then on top of that, 80% live in a home that they own. And that's not to say I don't know people that brew in apartments. I think, Kate has been brewing in an apartment for a long time. But, again, those are all kind of like things that are either they're just funny coincidence or there is just like a greater theme happening here. But, you also have your 20% are profession or as engineers or computer science. And as somebody that works in a tech industry, like I can definitely speak into that. I think there is something in this hobby that draws technically minded people that, not to harp on a previous podcast, that like view this like marriage of art and science together as like something very beautiful and attractive to them. And so, so I think that's all very fascinating there. And, kind of a little off topic, but I saw somebody comment, I think it was Chris Kobe, that like he thought what was wrong with like homebrewing, why it was detracting in popularity was like the BJCP, which I don't think that's 100% the case, but I tried to give it like at least 2 seconds of like merit in my head. And, all of these industries, it's like engineering, computer science, technical industries, they like to go to they have these kind of like guidelines that they need to follow within these parameters. And the BJCP definitely holds it there. And if you go to competitions, like everything's very focused on being within these parameters, being within these styles, being within this structure. And I wonder if that turns people off that are like a little more like creatively minded, because it seems like if you have that mindset that it needs to be within these style guidelines, maybe that like just kind of turns you off from wanting that like creative spark. Because we have this blank canvas, and there are some really talented people out there that can take this like blank canvas of these ingredients and like make something magical. I'm not really one of those people, but I wonder if like the so much focus on all of the structure kind of like inhibits them from wanting to come into it.
Yeah, man, that's a really good point. And something I want to spend some time chatting about, again, just our opinions on what we can do to make homebrewing just more appealing to the masses overall. I do feel a little bit like, I don't think it's the BJCP. I think it's the vocal group of people out there. We all know them. We've all seen different groups of people who stand out and then they scream from their pulpit that you have to do it this way. And if you don't, you're a shitty brewer who makes shit beer. And, I think a lot of people just look at that and go, ugh, that's not what I want to be involved with. I mean, shoot, I've been doing this for 20 years and I still feel that when I see that sometimes, like, what am I doing here? These people do not represent us, but they are so vocal, and then you see the back and forth. I mean, social media has changed homebrewing, unquestionably. You see the bickering back and forth between, known people in brewing and what all they're doing is sharing their opinions, but they're doing it in this like self-righteous, sanctimonious way. And I think when people see that, they're just, my hunch, if they're anything at all like me, which maybe they're not, there's some pretty heavy eye rolling going on there. And it just makes this hobby not look so fun or welcoming overall, I don't know. There's a lot of that, which is why we've approached, that has influenced our approach overall, trying not to spin our data as being, the end all be all, that you have to do something because we do it, trying not to denigrate, other approaches just because we don't do it, stuff like that. It's all good. Do what you want. This is just beer. But if you're going to preach this is just beer, then you got to live by it as well. And I feel like a lot of people online, whether you're going to Reddit or Homebrew Talk or Facebook, a lot of people would just want their voice to be heard, and they want everybody to believe that, they've got it figured out. it's just beer. Just chill out a little bit, you know?
Well, and again, I'm not trying to imply that the BJCP is bad or anything like that. The BJCP it isn't bad. I like the BJCP. I love what they're doing, cataloging guidelines. So let me throw that out there before I get a bunch of emails. But I do, like, when you go to these clubs, like, what are you doing? Like, so many people are judging just based off of a style guideline, just based off of this. If I hand you a beer, odds are the first thing you're going to ask me is like, well, what style is this? And so we kind of live within this structure. But part of that is because it seems like a lot of structured, like, professional engineering, computer science, technical people are the ones that are attracted to this hobby, which is absolutely fascinating to me. Because again, and it's cool. Like, you get to like thrive within this structure. But even competitions, like, you're submitting it to be the best within this like certain guideline or confinement. And so like, there's not really, I know there's the special categories, but there's not really like a spot for this most creative style of beer or something. So like, if you do have a creative slant, we've structured this in such a way where it feels maybe more structured than openly creative. And I know I've harped on that a little bit, but I just want to kind of like reiterate some of that.
Yeah. Specifically BJCP, I love it as well. And I know that Gordon, and Kristen, both their hearts are in the right place. And you have to understand that is a document that was, that is largely intended for competition. That is what it's for. Each style creates this anchor that you judge a beer against. And for that purpose, I think it's beautiful. And I love the fact that the BJCP guidelines have become kind of this living document that they're willing to update. They're willing to integrate new styles, who knows, maybe West Coast Pills will make it on their, in the next iteration, who knows? But that is not as confining as I think a lot of people view it as being. Again, you've got style dogmatists in every realm, whether it's brewing lager beers, brewing sour beers, styles in general. You've got people who are going to hardcore stick to what they read. That is perfectly fine. I appreciate those folks just as much as I do the creative ones out there who are making all of these new beers that, some of which I may not be the biggest fan of, but others where I'm like, wow, I would never have thought to do this. To me, it's all good. What I struggle with is the fight to make everyone else be just like you. That would be boring. What we need is diversity, not just in the way we look, but in the way we do things in this hobby. And I think that's what's going to keep it alive. What else? I mean, do you have any other ideas as to what might be done on our level, as just the peons who are at home brewing in our garages, as well as maybe on the bigger scale to make this hobby more appealing to other people? Do we need to integrate things like making hard seltzer and making cider and make that a bigger part of what we're doing? Is there anything like that? I mean, what do you think?
So when we're talking about diversity here, I mean, there's an age diversity issue. Obviously, young people aren't getting into it. There's an issue with sex, an issue with like, cultural boundaries, racial, ethnic boundaries that need to be broken down. And so, as the face of homebrewing, you and I, bearded, middle-aged white men, I'm not sure that we are going to be the ones, like, I have fun spitballing about this, but we're not going to be the ones to answer this particular question necessarily, because again, you already pointed out, which is 100% accurate, we only see through the lens that we have, which is, I'm a guy from Northeast Texas that, happened to see some of the world, and I can only see through that middle-aged white guy from Northeast Texas lens, which is going to be different than your growing up on the West Coast with your aunt and uncle and a twin brother lens. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's going to be different no matter what. And so I think the way we use our influence and our positions here is I think we can promote thoughtful conversations, especially with the people that we're like kind of interested in bringing into the hobby. And if we can facilitate those like thoughtful, meaningful conversations to reach like understanding or to reach, betterment, I think that's the idea isn't going to come from you and me or necessarily, or maybe even the, AHA or anybody like that. It's going to come from one of these, probably a younger person, maybe a female, maybe somebody in the LGBTQ community, someone with those kinds of slants are going to be the one that have probably the best ideas to get people from different backgrounds into this hobby. It's not going to be the current face of homebrewing, which is you and I probably.
Yeah, so I agree with that. And that's not to say that I don't want to be a part of encouraging people who don't look like us. I think the concern that I have is looking that oh, I'm the one who can figure out how to get people who don't look like me involved in this. I'm owning that I don't think I have the ability to do that because of my blinders that are up by being, the stereotypical homebrewer. But at the same time, I'm open to any ideas that anybody might have to make this more appealing and supporting those people who don't look like us. And I want to keep doing that. There's a blanket, I think, understanding that you and I share here that we are blinded by I hate this word because it's become so political, but privilege, by what we were born with. It makes it very difficult to understand what others who don't look like us are going through in this. And I know that this is just beer and brewing, whatever. It's the same thing, I think, and it's a small analog of what's happening in the real world. But we'll leave it at that. We are absolutely open to doing whatever we can to make this hobby more appealing to everybody out there. Now, we don't usually cover reader comments on these Brews Views episodes, but I felt like doing so for this one as people made some really good points, asked some decent questions that I'd like to address on the article. Now, just for clarification's sake, in the intro of the results article that I wrote for this survey, I mentioned how a number of survey respondents left some pretty nasty comments on the actual survey itself. So we asked a question on the survey, and rather than answering it, they wrote in some just gnarly stuff that blew my mind that homebrewers would act like this. Now, I suppose that's to be expected when anything that's anonymous. There's one comment thread on our article. You can go find it on the website, brewlosophy.com, where a couple of folks make some claims about the AHA and their, quote, political agenda. I have no interest in getting political here, and for that reason, I've decided not to include that very lengthy thread on this episode. Julia Hertz from the AHA actually got involved in it. However, I would like to say that all of us here at Brewlosophy not only want to see more diversification in homebrewing, but less vitriol and hate in this hobby, as well as the world in general. Why anyone would be against any attempt to make anything more welcoming to everybody is beyond me. I mean, you have to be pretty insecure in yourself to think that there's anything of value in being such a dick to other people. Now, if you've been listening to this show for any amount of time, you're very well aware that we refrain from discussing things that are a little bit too touchy lest we hurt the wrong person's feelings. And honestly, we intend to keep it that way. But if you're going to try to use Brewlosophy as a platform to express your bigoted views, we're going to call you out. So, all right, I'm going to get off my soapbox there. First comment comes from Swiss Rob, who says, interesting as always. I'm surprised how few homebrewers use the no sparge method, which I use and copied from Marshall's setup. No sparge. That is basically brew in a bag just without the bag. You can use the bag for no sparge. It just means that you're not rinsing those grains. What do you think is responsible for that decline as well, Will?
So I think one thing, because the rise of electric all-in-one systems is coming up, and I at least know with the Brewzillas and then that I used to use, and then the Deltas that I currently use, they don't hold quite enough liquid to do no sparge unless you start reducing your batch sizes down, to closer to 4 gallons. And so it just may be a function of equipment in some ways, because again, if you're using an electric all-in-one, it's actually kind of hard to get your complete volume in there unless you're doing a really low ABV beer.
Yeah, or if you've got a bigger setup. I mean, that was, I know exactly what you're talking about. Like the Brewzillas, if you want to make a 5.5 gallon batch, pretty standard, you're going to struggle to do an actual no sparge in there. I think, though, that the reason the no sparge, that we asked specifically, no sparge method, right? That you're seeing those numbers go down is because you're seeing more people reporting brew in a bag or brew in a basket, as it were, with these all-in-one systems. And so that's kind of fudging those numbers a little bit. They're still doing essentially no sparge. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's kind of I do think there are some of these things that kind of overlap, and it's kind of hard to just totally zoom in on this one no sparge, because again, there's different ways to do this. With even a batch sparge system, you could do no sparge. It's just it looks different than when you do a brew in a bag.
Yeah, totally. And no sparge is great. That's still what I do. It's just brew in a bag in my electric system. So I get it. Some people made some comments like, well, I use an all-in-one electric system with a brew bag, no sparge. So how do I respond to these questions? You got to kind of figure something out, because they are kind of overlapping there in terms of your technique. Our intention with that question was, are you doing specifically no sparge in a mash tun, the old classic way, or are you you doing brew in a bag, or are you using an all-in-one system, which is designed for these, kind of quasi-sparge methods? So next comment comes from Chris. He says, as someone in several of the very tiny slivers on the demographic questions, I am not surprised at the negative comments, that though always disappointing. Certainly plenty of work to do on that front. What Chris is referring to were these nasty comments that some people left on the survey. The fact that it's not surprising, I think that's just a bummer to me. It was surprising to me, but.
So something I hate is that we talk about diversity and there's this immediate like political connotation that comes up. And I really hate that that's the case. It really shouldn't be political. And in fact, we sometimes use these numbers to like look at statistics to kind of like dehumanize it, but know that behind all these statistics are people. And they're actual individual human beings. And every human being, I don't care where you're coming from, whatever, deserves a level of respect.
Yeah.
And so to me, like it's also very disappointing. Like I wish that wasn't the case. I mean, you don't have to agree with everything, but they all deserve a measure of respect and a level of love, of the same love that you'd give your neighbor or yourself.
Yeah. I was reading through this long thread. These two folks were kind of going back and forth on the website. I'm not a big fan of censorship, so as long as it doesn't get too awful, I feel like I think it's better for people to be able to see that there are folks who have these different opinions and such out there. What kind of occurred to me is that there's this. It seems like there's a segment of people around these days, whether that's in homebrewing or in life in general, who seem to think that or that the desire to want to make something more diversified and inclusive is automatically viewed as them pushing an agenda. And I feel like that can only come from a place of concern or fear that is rooted in some belief system, because otherwise it's just what it is. It's just a push to try to make things more diversified, to try to be more inclusive, to welcome more people. But if automatically the attempt to do that is going to be spun as this political attempt to liberalize whatever it is, then we've got issues somewhere else. Then the issue isn't necessarily, on the folks who are trying to push it, but I think it's the people who are interpreting that. And I can't for the life of me, as somebody who has the weirdest set of opinions, that are my own, that I don't feel like everybody has to follow, I can't understand why anybody would feel that it's appropriate, would think that it is helpful in any way, or even to think it was kind of funny to say some of the things that some of the respondents to this survey said. I mean, and you can imagine what questions those were on. Most of them had to do with the gender and sex questions. What gets into people to think that that's going to have some good impact? Maybe they don't care. I mean, maybe they are they're the apathetic ones who have kind of given up. I don't know, but it's just wild to me. I can't relate with that, and I usually pride myself on at least being able to understand other perspectives, and that one just doesn't jibe,
Well, there is this kind of level, like I briefly touched on, like in grouping and out grouping, and there is this level. We don't, not to get too psychological here, but we're talking about this. There is this level of like tribalism that still exists in modern society, where we just have like the kind of, if you're not with us, you're against us kind of mentality that doesn't value like a diverse group within those kind of tribal subsets, for lack of a better word. And so like, tribalism we view as this ancient thing that nobody, tribes across the river aren't trying to kill each other anymore, but it very much exists in our human psychology. And it's very fascinating to kind of watch it play out in a more modern context. It's just also disappointing.
Yeah, it is. I think that's the best word. It's just kind of disappointing to see. On that note, though, and I know this rubs some people the wrong way as well. I'm the type of person who doesn't understand fighting hate with hate, right? And I know that sounds awful and that it's like excuse making, but it's not. I am not condoning anything any of these people do. I just genuinely believe that the only way we're going to find common ground is by being polite to each other, even if the other person isn't being polite. And that's just a personal philosophy that I live by. So hey, for those of you out there who are leaving these horrible comments, if you want a beer and you want to talk it through, hit me up sometime. I'll do that with you. But I'll be sure to let you know what we really think, because I think it's important that everyone out there know that this is a welcoming community of people overall. Despite the few out there who the bad apples, as it were. So we got a couple more comments that had to do with questions relating to the survey and the responses in it. Overall, the first one comes from Dave, who says losing almost half the previous year's respondents dominance is pretty shocking. As a scientist, no doubt you have a hypothesis or two about this. What are your thoughts? And then Adrian M. also kind of hits on this, and he says, how did you solicit responses? I'm subscribed to the website and I get emails notifying me of new posts, but I never saw anything about the survey. I had no idea it existed. Maybe that's why you got 1,000 less responses. So here's my perspective. I do have a hypothesis or two, Dave. I think they're going to be a lot more basic than maybe you're hoping for. But we did post an article to the website, as we have done every single year, in the same exact manner. And it was called, I believe it was called the 2023 Homebrewers, General Homebrewer Survey released or something like that. It was out there. And we did all of the same thing. Now, I don't talk too much about why we do the things we do or where we promote things and all that. We have not been posting as often to Reddit because that community, out of respect for that community who had a decent amount of people from that community made it very well known that they did not like our participation in that forum. And so we backed off a little bit out of respect for that community. We have since heard from another much larger swath of people that they do appreciate having us around, in the Reddit community. And so maybe that did have an impact, but I don't think it had the biggest impact. I went back and looked at past survey responses, and it was a roughly similar number of people who found it through Reddit back then as they did this time, even though we didn't post it directly to Reddit. People are still finding the website through Reddit. And I just don't think that explains fully, at least, the lack of responses that we got this year. My hypothesis, and this is the big bummer, is just that there aren't as many people interested. There aren't as many people reading the website. There aren't as many people involved in brewing. And we've been lucky enough to kind of survive through this and, still be able to do what we're doing. I just don't think there's as many people out there who are brewing, and that's what we're seeing. I think this is a direct reflection of that. Obviously, it is a cut from the cloth of the brewlosophy, the people who are interested in brewlosophy. But we did share this on other forums that aren't specifically brewlosophy related. And we had a lot of people, take the survey from there as well. I can't say exactly what it's from, but I honestly do think, maybe you disagree with me, Will, that it is just a reflection of the this kind of decline in brewing and homebrewing altogether. I feel like as much as it hurts to say that, we have to be honest with ourselves that we're kind of losing people at this point.
I wish I could have some good reason to totally disagree with you. I wish there was like an easier explanation or a box to tick. I wish it was just that you didn't post enough on Reddit. I really wish all those things were true. I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Marshall. It's just the hobby as a whole is declining. Beer consumption as a whole is declining. There's a whole lot of things going on right now that it just puts us all in a decline. And so, maybe you could have gotten a couple hundred more people had you posted it in Reddit, but I don't think anything explains the drop off that is this significant.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And for those wondering, well, maybe you didn't have the survey out there long enough. We actually left it open 3 weeks longer than usual this year than we have in the past. And again, we shared it in every forum that all of our social media. We pushed it in other forums as uncomfortable as that is for us. I think it's just a sign of where things are today. And as big of a bummer as that can be, we do still have a very strong community of people who are so dedicated to this thing. And I'm talking about homebrewers across the world. And we are the ones who are going to be responsible for making it better and for bringing more people in and making it more, appealing to those who don't look like us, who don't talk like us, who don't brew like us. And I think that is our number one goal for now. If anybody has any ideas as to what we can do at Brewlosophy to make that, make it more that way, then let us know. We're open to all of that stuff. So that is all the time we've got for this episode. I know we did not cover nearly, not even close to everything that the survey did. So if you want to go read more about it and you happen to miss that article, you can go to brewlosophy.com. Will, do you have any final comments before we end this episode?
I really love this survey. I do think it's a great thing. I think it's a great starting point because while I did say that I don't know that you or I are the exact spark that's going to ignite all the change, I do think we can be facilitators for that change. I do think Brewlosophy, for who we are, I think we are promoting thoughtful conversation. We'll continue to promote thoughtful conversation. And so if anyone wants to have a thoughtful conversation about anything we discussed today, I'm happy. Just reach out with an email and I'm happy to have those conversations.
Yeah, there's a reason we're called Brewlosophy. philosophy. You know, my heart was in brewing and philosophy. Those are kind of the two things I geeked out on at the time I started this. And that on that philosophy side, that brewlosophical side, if you will, I've always wanted to be open to being honest and talking about this stuff in a way that it doesn't usually get talked about. So if you have ideas, we are more than open to sharing, some of your thoughts on an episode. We've done full episodes just on listener feedback before because we value that. And we think it's important that others hear your thoughts and see the different perspectives that people have. So I do feel like that is, whether it's us facilitating it or not, I do feel like that is one of the more positive roles that we as people with a voice in homebrewing can have on the hobby. And I just hope to see things get better from here on out. So don't forget to subscribe to the Brew Lab, where host Kay Job takes you into the lab with brewing scientists to discuss the fascinating research they've performed, and make sure to keep up with all of our beer and brewing antics over at brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.